A private jet taxis at 2 in the morning. A phone buzzes a number, already different than it was at breakfast. Somewhere else, the same night, a man counts cardboard signs for a living, checking boxes on a government form nobody reads twice. Both of them are being measured. Neither of them did the math. You are about to live through 10 ranks of modern wealth, from a street no one counts twice a year to a list updated every single day by people who have never met the person on it. By the end, you'll understand why not one rank on this ladder, not even the top of it, ever gets to calculate its own number. Level 1. The Unhoused. 4:15 in the morning. A man in a reflective vest walks the length of the block, counting. He does not ask your name. He marks a box on a clipboard, moves to the next doorway, and keeps walking. This happens once a year, on one cold night in January, the same night, in every city, all at once. It is called a point-in-time count. In January 2025, it counted 745,652 people. 266,000 of them were sleeping outside, not in a shelter, not in a car, but on the ground. Chronic homelessness, long-term, tied to a disability, hit the highest number ever recorded that year. 155,750 people. That's not a guess. That's a government tally, taken street by street, block by block. You are one of the boxes on that clipboard, or you are not, and that absence is its own kind of number, one nobody writes down. Either way, the cardboard sign against the shopping cart is still wet from last night's rain. The ink has run. It doesn't matter. Nobody stops to read it. What matters is the box. Checked or not checked, there is no ladder here yet. There is only the night, and the man with the clipboard, and the number he decides to write or not write based on rules you didn't make and can't appeal. You learn the rules anyway, because you have to. A shelter bed is not the same as a permanent address. A permanent address is not the same as a job. A job that pays enough to cover both, that's the first real door out, and it is farther away than it looks from here. What you don't know yet, standing in the cold, watching the vest disappear around the corner, is that the counting never stops. It just changes instruments. Somewhere else tonight, a different kind of number is being written down, not on a clipboard, on a screen that updates by the second. The man writing it has never been cold in his life, but he is being counted too, just differently shaped. Level 2. The Working Poor. The screen lights up at 6 in the morning, a notification, payday. By the time you've read it, half of it is already spoken for: rent, a phone bill, the minimum payment on something you stopped tracking months ago. That's not a metaphor. That's arithmetic you did in your head before you were fully awake. For years, one number decided who counted as financially stable in America: $400. Could you cover a surprise expense that size, in cash, without borrowing? The Federal Reserve asked this question year after year, and the honest answer for a large share of working households was no. Not because they were careless with money, because there wasn't a margin to be careless with. You have a job. That's the part people forget to ask about. A job, sometimes two. Hours that don't quite add up to a stable schedule. A paycheck that arrives on time but never grows, not with the rent, not with the price of anything you actually need. The clipboard from last night doesn't reach you here. Nobody counts you on a single January night because you have an address. What counts you instead is quieter. A missed payment flagged in a database. A credit score that drops before you even notice the bill was late. That's the same instrument, really just smaller, faster, and running every single day instead of once a year. One bad week is the whole hinge. A car that won't start. A child running a fever the same day the shift can't be covered. It doesn't take a catastrophe. It takes one $400 problem arriving on a week that has no room for it. You don't think about the man with the clipboard. You don't have to. But the margin between his world and yours is thinner than either of you would like to admit, and getting thinner every year. The rent goes up faster than the paycheck does. What you don't know yet is that the gap above you isn't standing still either. While you're doing the math on this week's $400 somewhere else, the math is being done in trillions, and it hasn't been kind to anyone standing where you're standing. Level 3, the lower middle. The bills are on the table, not in a pile in an order. Rent first, then the one with the red text, then the one that can wait, because the company sending it never actually shuts anything off. This is stability, technically. A steady paycheck. A lease with your name on it. No clipboard, no January count, no box checked against you. But steady isn't the same as safe, and you know the difference in your body before you know it in numbers. Here's the number anyway. In 2016, the top 20% of American households held 77% of the country's total wealth, more than 3 times what the entire middle 60% held combined. You're somewhere in that middle 60. Not the bottom. Not close to the top. Just inside the portion that splits what's left after the other fifth takes its share. Nobody explained this to you when you signed the lease. Nobody explains it to anyone. It's not a rule written down anywhere you'd be handed it. It's just the shape of the room you're standing in, and you only notice the shape when you try to move, and the walls are closer than you expected. You budget. You clip a coupon out of habit, not desperation yet. You keep a number in your head for how much is in the account, and you check it more often than you'd admit to anyone. That number is yours. It's the only one on this ladder so far that you actually calculated yourself. Which is worth noticing, because it won't last. Somewhere above you, a much larger portion of that same 80% is about to fall further behind, not because they did anything differently, but because the fifth above them is about to pull away even faster than it already has. Level 4, the middle class. The 401k statement sits unopened on the counter, next to a mortgage bill that isn't. You own something now. A house, a piece of one, at least enough of it that the bank's name is still on the deed alongside yours. That used to feel like the finish line. It still gets called that, by people who haven't checked the actual math in a while. Here's the math. In 1989, the richest 5% of American families held about 114 times as much wealth as the families one rung above the bottom. By 2016, that number was 248 times. The gap didn't creep. It more than doubled while you were doing everything you were told would close it. Working, saving, not touching the account except in an emergency, and sometimes touching it anyway. Your net worth moved during that same stretch too. It went up some years, it went down in others hard in the years right after the last recession, and it took most of a decade to climb back to where it had been before that happened. The top of the ladder didn't share that weight. Their number recovered faster, then kept climbing past where it had started. Nobody above you had to do anything differently to make that happen. That's the part that doesn't sit right, once you actually look at it. It's not that the wealthy worked harder during those years. It's that the system amplifies whatever you already have, and what you already had, at every point on this ladder so far, was less. You're not counted on a clipboard. You're not one bad week from the count either. But you are, still, standing exactly where the gap keeps widening, and the widening has nothing to do with anything you did or didn't do this year. What you don't know yet is how differently that same gap feels from 3 rungs up. Enough money finally starts to feel less like survival and more like a decision. It doesn't feel safer, just different. Level 5, the mass affluent. The advisor's office has a framed certificate on the wall you don't read closely. You've been here before. You'll be here again, every quarter, for a review that always starts the same way. You ask the question quietly, the way people ask things they're a little embarrassed to need answered. Is $2 million enough? Enough to stop, eventually, enough to not think about it every day. The advisor doesn't answer right away. That pause tells you more than the answer will. Here's what a recent study found. Across American adults holding at least $1 million in investable assets, only 36% of them actually call themselves wealthy. Not comfortable, not stable. Wealthy, the word itself. 2 out of 3 people who cleared a bar most of the planet will never see still don't feel like they cleared it. You have more than 99% of every king, every emperor, every ruler who ever lived, measured in what you can buy, what you can eat, how fast you can travel, what medicine can do for you if something goes wrong. None of that history matters to the number in your account. The number doesn't compare itself to the past. It compares itself to the tier just above it. That's the trick of this rung, and nobody warns you about it walking in. The comparison never resets. It just moves up with you. You don't have the private banker yet. You don't have the family office, the security detail, the jet on standby. You have a certificate on a wall, a quarterly meeting, and a feeling that arrived with the first million and never quite left with the second. What you don't know yet is that the feeling doesn't go away 3, 4, 5 rungs from here. It just gets a better office to sit in. Level 6, the high net worth. The private banker knows your accounts better than your spouse does. That's not an accusation. It's just a fact about how the last few years went. You have a name for this now, a category, on paper, that unlocks a different kind of phone call when you need one. Someone answers on the second ring instead of navigating a menu. Someone already knows the portfolio before you finish the sentence. It costs something to get here. Most people who reach this rung already know what, they just don't say it out loud very often. A survey of over 2,000 American millionaires found that 68% of them expressed regret about mistakes made in a relationship with a spouse or family, tied directly to the pursuit of the wealth they now hold. 64% said they'd given up family time to get here, not slowly either. On purpose, one missed dinner, one skipped recital at a time, each one small enough to justify in the moment. The money bought back time eventually. A little of it. Not the specific hours already spent, though. Those don't come back at any price point on this ladder. Your children, if you have them, are growing up inside a version of stability you never had. That's supposed to feel like the point of all of it. Mostly, it does. Some nights, it feels like something else, like the safety you built for them cost you the version of yourself that would have been fully present to enjoy it with them. You don't mention this to the private banker. It's not the kind of thing the portfolio review covers. What you don't know yet is that the isolation doesn't peak here. It's only getting started, and the next few rungs will trade the version you feel now for one with better security and worse company. Level 7, the very high net worth. The meeting isn't about investments this time. It's about a threshold. $80 million, give or take, and the question on the table is whether that number justifies leaving the shared platform you've used for a decade for something built to answer to no one but you. That something has a name. A family office. Not a bank account. An entire operating structure, investment staff, tax specialists, legal counsel, sometimes a person whose only job is managing the household itself, built around one family's money and nothing else. It isn't free to want that kind of privacy. A single family office typically needs somewhere north of $100 million sitting behind it just to make sense, because running one costs $2 to $5 million a year, sometimes more, in salaries alone. Below that line, families share instead. A multi-family office pools several fortunes together, splits the overhead, and calls it efficient. It is efficient. It is also, by definition, not entirely yours. So the advisor lays out both paths, and the family does the math out loud, the way people do when the number is too large to hold quietly in one person's head. Whichever way it goes, something is being purchased that has nothing to do with returns, distance. The kind of distance where nobody outside a small paid circle knows what you're worth, what you own, or what you're worried about this quarter. That distance is the actual product here, not growth, not access, just space between you and everyone who isn't on the payroll. Nobody at this table mentions the man on the corner with the cardboard sign, 6 rungs and one enormous amount of money away. There's no reason to. But the same instinct that built the family office, control the count, control who gets to see it, exists on both ends of this ladder. It just costs a very different amount to satisfy. What you don't know yet is that owning your own counting apparatus doesn't make the counting stop. It just moves the counting somewhere private and somewhere considerably more expensive to interrupt. Level 8. The ultra-high net worth. The hangar is quiet at midnight. Quiet in the specific way that costs money, no other engines nearby, no terminal noise, just the low hum of a jet being prepped for a flight that will happen whenever you're ready, not before. Your phone buzzes before the wheels leave the ground. A ticker. Something slid 0.5% while you weren't looking. It will slide back, probably, by the time you land. It usually does. You check anyway. This is what the family office was built to manage, the actual apparatus behind the calm. A security detail that knows your children's school schedule better than some of their teachers do. A staff that handles the parts of life you no longer touch directly, the household, the calendar, the small emergencies that used to require your own 2 hands and now require a phone call to someone else's. None of it was an accident. Every layer of it was purchased, deliberately, to put distance between your family and a world that has started to look at you differently since the number changed. A study out of Boston College surveyed more than 160 families holding $25 million or more. What it found wasn't extravagance. It was a kind of quiet exhaustion. Many of them said they'd lost the right to complain about anything because complaining from where they stood sounded ungrateful to everyone who wasn't standing there with them. Some worried their children would grow up spoiled. Others worried the opposite, that the children would resent them for not leaving enough behind. Almost all of them, in one form or another, said the same thing. They still didn't feel financially secure. Not at 25 million, not at 50. You recognize the feeling before you finish reading about it. It's the same one from 3 rungs down. The one you thought the private banker would eventually make disappear. It didn't disappear. It moved into a bigger house. Old friends call less. Not because anything happened, nothing ever happened. That's the strange part. The distance just accumulated, one skipped gathering at a time, until it was easier not to schedule the next one. You tell yourself it's privacy. Some nights, alone in a house built for a family that isn't home yet, it feels more like something else. The jet levels off. The ticker steadies. Somewhere below, invisible from this altitude, a man is being counted on a clipboard for the first and only time this year. You are being counted too, just more often, more precisely, and by people who will never once ask how you're actually doing. What you don't know yet is that the rung above this one isn't calmer. It's the one where the counting stops being private altogether and starts happening in public, every single day, whether you consent to it or not. Level 9, the Centimillionaire Club. The call is about a yacht, not whether to sell it, whether it counts. $100 million sits close enough to a very specific line that every asset in the portfolio is suddenly a question instead of a fact. Does this count as liquid? Does that count against the total? Does the boat sitting in a marina in Monaco count as wealth or as an expense pretending to be an investment? Somebody, somewhere, is about to decide, not you. Twice a year, sometimes more, a small team of researchers compiles a list. Forbes runs one. Bloomberg runs a different one, updated every day the moment New York's markets close. Both of them value what they can verify: public shares, filed disclosures, disclosed real estate, and estimate everything else. Private companies get valued by comparing them to similar public ones, then discounted, usually by around 5 to 10%, just for not being liquid enough to sell quickly. That's the actual mechanism behind the number that will eventually define you, not a bank statement. A team of journalists running comparisons and discounts, the same way an appraiser prices a house nobody's selling. Some people help that team along. They provide documents, meet in person, answer the calls. Others don't, for reasons that range from privacy to simple distrust of the exercise. Which means some of the wealthiest people alive have gone uncounted for years, not poor, not modest, just invisible to the apparatus doing the counting. One former editor of the Bloomberg Index once said his team found 400 hidden billionaires in just the first 5 years of compiling the list. 400 people, sitting on 10-figure fortunes who simply hadn't been found yet. You are close enough to the threshold now that both outcomes feel equally real, being found or not being found. Crossing the line publicly, or sitting just beneath it, privately, for reasons that have nothing to do with how much you actually have. The call about the yacht ends without a decision. It will come up again next quarter, when the number is recalculated by someone who has never seen the boat, never met your family, and has no idea what any of it actually feels like from the deck of it. Level 10, the Ranked Billionaire. A name updates on a website that never sleeps. The number beside it moved twice today, already up at the opening bell, down an hour later, entirely because of a market neither you nor the company you built actually controls. By dinner, it will have moved again. Nobody will call to explain why. This is the number the rest of the ladder has been climbing toward the entire time. It feels, from below, like the one certainty at the top, the one figure that must finally be exact, verified, beyond dispute. It is the opposite of that. Both major lists that track it say so themselves. In the fine print, nobody reads. What they can verify: public shares, filed disclosures, they verify. Everything else, they estimate. A comparable company, a discount for the fact that none of it can be sold quickly, a judgment call dressed up as a figure. Two teams, working independently, regularly land on two different numbers for the same fortune. That's not an error in the math. That is the math. When the thing being measured refuses to sit still long enough to be measured properly, you are, by several distances, the most counted person on this entire ladder, tracked daily, published globally, argued about by strangers who will never meet you, in a comment section attached to a number you didn't calculate and can't correct. And somewhere beneath the surface of all of it sits an old, comforting story, the one about sudden money always finding a way to disappear, about windfalls cursed to evaporate within a few short years. It's been repeated for decades, cited by name-brand institutions, believed by people who should know better. The organization it's always attributed to has said, plainly, on the record, they never produced that number. Nobody ever did. It survives anyway, because a story people want to believe rarely needs a source. which is the whole shape of this ladder, seen from the top looking down, a tally on a clipboard, taken once a year, by a stranger who never asks your name. A tally on a screen, taken every day, by strangers who never will either. Different instruments. Same hand, doing the counting, that isn't yours. The man on the street was counted once, on one cold night in January, by a stranger with a clipboard who never asked his name. The man on the list is counted every day by strangers with spreadsheets, in a number that shifts before he's finished his coffee. Neither of them calculated his own worth. Neither of them ever will. The cycle continues.